Well, moving on now, the Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, Oil, Senator Heineken Lukwebiri, says the recent gale of the divestment in the oil and gas sector in Nigeria was already yielding the expected results in terms of increased crude production. The minister said this while receiving a delegation of the Independent Petroleum Producers Group leadership, whose members also recently acquired the assets from international oil companies.
Now, Lukwebiri maintains that divestments are part of the energy business, expressing his pleasure that under the current administration of President Bola Tinubu, several divestment deals that had lingered for years had been successfully concluded. He reiterated the federal government's commitment to supporting indigenous companies in future divestment engagements with international oil companies, while also urging indigenous companies to increase oil production by re-entering inactive wells.
Well, Dr. Timothy Okon, Group CEO, Tenor Energy, joins us now as we take a look at the IOC's divestment of onshore assets to local players and the impact on the oil industry. Thank you so much for being on the news tonight.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so, I mean, let's begin with what the minister is saying there. The government is calling this divestment a success, boosting local participation and increasing production. Do you agree with that? And many of these assets, some would say, come with a long history of environmental damage and community tension. So are local companies inheriting a poison chalice?
Well, I think let me first just agree with the whole concept of divestments, because it's part of a natural business cycle. So you explore, you find, the field matures, and you begin to experience the decline in production performance. Now, once a field reaches what we call the economic limit, and what is that? When the revenues that it produces is less than the first line charge of royalty and the operating expenses, then it doesn't become economic. The key word there is the operating expenses. Obviously, the majors may not have the kind of lower cost base that a smaller company would handle, and they generally transition out of such fields for smaller companies to operate. It favors the country, because once you have lower operating costs, you're operating more efficiently, etc. Right. So that's a very, very valid point. Well, obviously, under the terms of the PIA, the decommissioning and abandonment provisions are there. And depending on how these things are negotiated, those obligations remain, and they have to be discharged by new buyers, etc. Right. Now, obviously, I cannot speak for their ability to negotiate or otherwise, but you need to be able to make an assessment of that, because the laws in the past, where we did not have very clear-cut laws on decommission and abandonment, we now have them. And I think it's very important that those who are buying these assets look at those obligations before they jumping in. Yes, they jump into these transactions. Good. But it's in a normal business cycle where you have natural resource depletion, that you would have these types of transactions. Okay, yes.
I mean, you seem to agree with the Petroleum Minister, Heineken Lukwebiri, who's saying, look, it's actually yielding the expected results in terms of increased crude production. Would you really agree to that point? And, well, I mean, experts like yourself, or, players in the field are saying that local or indigenous oil, companies can actually, control up to 70% with these divestments going on. But are the local investors, are they really seeing the opportunities? And are they fully equipped or well equipped to actually, fill the gap that these IOCs leave behind?
I think, for a country, there's the challenges that present can be overcome, because quite simply, these opportunities, when they become available, you have to go and source for funds. And for you to remain in business, you have to produce that field. So the general tendency would be because you have to pay the debt that you have now acquired, okay, and improve the performance of the field. The second point I want to just mention is that some of these divestments still have a characteristic that the IOCs that are divesting also hold some interests, are also helping with the financing, etc. So you would expect that if someone is lending you money, they want to be sure that you have the capacity to produce. So by deductions, I don't have the numbers, but by just simple deduction, the incentive to produce more, because you have acquired debt in order to produce it, it's obviously there. So you don't want to go into something that you cannot raise capital on. You don't want
Well, is
to
it just a funding problem? Sorry, I need to cut
No,
in.
the
Is it just a
environmental issue
funding
is
problem? Yeah. What are the other challenges?
the other challenges. You have, I think, the Niger Delta is widely known as one of the most polluted oil producing zones in the world. That we must not, and that is why the law provides for a very rigorous treatment of decommissioning and abandonment, and those provisions are meant to be enforced. So yes, the challenges of the environmental degradation are real, and any company that claims it's a sustainable, is in sustainable operations must deal with that challenge.
Interesting. Let's talk about investor confidence, because it seems to be the buzzword everybody's using. You take a step is to boost confidence of investors coming into the country, and the minister has reiterated that. In fact, he says this divestment does that. But I have to ask you, I mean, from the vantage point in which you do occupy as a player, how do global investors, how are they likely to view this when IOCs are divesting, and leaving for the local participation, which we are saying it's great. But is this a sign of reform or an exit strategy? How do they really view it?
Okay, depending on which the company's holding of the assets in question, I think, and depending on the fiscal arrangements between onshore, shallow offshore, and then the deep offshore, those are things that feature in these types of transactions. I think what the minister may have been alluding to was that they've streamlined the process of divestment. So that streamlining exercise means that the previous transactions that were held up have now been fast-tracked, and so there is a clear indication as to what the government intends to do to expand the availability of opportunities for local participants, etc. I'll just add a few comments. It's important to note that in the early 70s and in the 80s, etc., a lot of small fields were found, and what the PIA provides for is a mechanism by which the Commission would progress those small fields, that when you are converting to the new fiscal terms, you would need to drop some of these assets. Right. So that itself, if carefully enforced, would lead to more of these opportunities being available, and they would.
So if I hear you correctly, it's a win-win situation for local investors. Of course, there are calls for strengthening of the policy framework to ensure sustainability. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much. Dr. Timothy Okon is the Group CEO, Tenor Energy, joining us tonight on Newsnight.